If you're ready for a bit of a challenge, then you've come to the right knit along. In segment 1, I'll be giving you a quick rundown of what's to come in the pattern. Let's get started. Welcome to my channel and thanks for checking it out. I'm Stacy James with Just Spoolin Around, and we're going to be making this adorable panda shaped blanket as part of my Blanimals series. This is considered an advanced pattern because we're going to be applying the Intarsia technique for changing color along the row, in addition to working increases and decreases to get our blanket in the shape of a panda. Once that's been completed, we will then perform the detail work, which includes some surface stitching, single crochet border work, duplicate stitching, and embroidery stitching. We'll begin by starting 3 separate pieces: 2 paws and the belly. In row 7, we'll be joining these 3 pieces to begin working the panda as one piece. And the paws will be worked in rows 1 through 6, but the belly will start at row 3 and go through row 6. This keeps the pattern in uniform and will make much more sense once we get into working the pattern. So, what are you going to need for this project? Great question. The panda is worked using 7-weight jumbo chenille in 2 colors. I use black and white, but you may like to use different colors, so I'll refer to them as colors A and B respectively throughout. You'll need 125 yards or 114 meters in color A, and 162 yards or 148 meters in color B. You'll also need a good pair of scissors. I like to use a crochet hook for some of the detailing work because I knit really tight. It makes feeding yarn and thread through stitches a lot easier for me, but it's entirely optional. And finally, you'll need your preferred tools for completing the finishing work as well. I use a lighter to join, thread to secure joins and single ends, and fray block to seal single tail ends. All recommended tools are provided in the links below. Be sure to subscribe, like, and ring that notification bell so I can continue to make free content. When you're ready to get started, we'll meet back up in part 1 of our Intarsia and shaping segment where we'll make the paws. In segment 2, we're going to be knitting the entire panda using the Intarsia method for changing colors and shaping methods such as increasing and decreasing to actually get it into the shape of a panda. In part 1, we're going to be making the paws, so here we go. We're going to start with working a partial of the first of 2 paws, which consists of only 6 rows. Let's begin by chaining 3 using color A, turn the foundation chain upside down, then knit 2 through the back humps for a total of 3 stitches on row 1. Now with row 2, we need to increase on both ends to begin shaping the paw. On row 2, there is only 1 stitch of color A on each edge, which means that we're not only increasing on the edge stitches, but we're also changing colors on the second stitch of our increase as well. And let me show you how that's done. Continuing with color A, we're going to start row 2 by purling that last stitch on row 1. Move the working yarn to the back of the work. Now we're going to introduce a color change, so grab color B. Unravel it a bit. Now here we're going to place that tail end under that old strand of yarn. Okay, and we're going to knit through the same stitch, that same first stitch or last stitch on row 1, to give us that increase that we need. Okay, so you're just going to work a knit stitch right there. And here you can see that we've got 2 stitches in that one end stitch from row 1. We've just increased our stitch count by 1 on row 2. Now we're going to knit the next 2 stitches using color B before we knit that second stitch, we're going to turn the last chain there because it gets twisted, and we'll knit that last one. And now we've got to do an increase here too, but we also have to change color. So we're going to grab another ball of color A, and we'll get it unraveled here. Now this time we're going to put the working yarn, well, the old goes over new, so we're going to do that, but then we're going to put the working yarn in the front. And it actually should be going in the front of that stitch, but I'm messed up on that there, so don't do what I'm doing. And we're just going to purl there. It's really not that big of a deal how I did that on that one, but we won't do that again in the future. So here we can see that we've purled through the same stitch as the last knit stitch that we worked, okay? So we've increased our stitch count by 1 again on row 2. So now we should have 5 stitches total. We're going to increase again on row 3. So with color A, purl into that last stitch on row 2, and then move that working yarn to the back of the work and place that old yarn, which is color A, over the new yarn, which is color B. We need to pick up color B and work the second part of our increase. And crossing them this way, make sure that they are trapped and don't leave a hole. So now what we want to do is we want to knit through the same stitch that we purled through from row 2. I'm just showing you that stitch there. So now with your color B, go ahead and knit through that same stitch. We've now increased our stitch count by 1 on row 3. Now feed color B under color A to give yourself some yarn to work with as you knit the next 4 stitches using color B. And I'll meet back up with you at the end. I'm working that 4th stitch, and now we need to pick up color A to work the increase and last stitch on row 3. So we're going to cross the old yarn over the new yarn. Bring color A to the front of the work and purl through the same stitch as the last knit stitch to increase the stitch count by 1 a second time. So we now have 2 stitches in that last stitch, and we should have 7 stitches on row 3. I want to point out here that our leads are all crossing each other, okay? The color A is crossing color B is then crossing color A, okay? And that is how it's going to be on our odd row passes for now. Continue with color A for row 4 and knit that first stitch. Now we want to pick up B, so we're going to cross that old yarn over the new. And here we see that the strands are going to uncross. How cool is that? Now this strand of color B is coming from the row below. So we want to reduce the slack between the rows by giving that strand a tug without tightening that stitch from the previous row, from where it's coming from. And then we're going to knit the next 5 stitches. And I'll meet back up with you on the color change. I've just completed stitch 5 in color B, and I need to pick up color A, so I want to cross the old over the new, just like so. We can see that those leads are untangled. Yay! And we want to give that new strand a tug to reduce the slack without tightening the stitch from the previous row. and knit that last stitch. Now we're going to increase again on row 5. So this first stitch is going to be a purl. So move the working yarn to the front and purl that first stitch. Then move the working yarn to the back of the work, and we're going to change colors. So we'll place the old yarn over the new yarn, and we're going to pick up color B, give it a little tug to reduce that slack between the rows without changing the size of that stitch, okay? And then we want to knit through the back of that same first stitch that we purled through. So let's knit that stitch. Now once we get that that stitch knitted, we're going to feed that color B under color A so that we have enough yarn to work the next 6 stitches. Okay, so knit the next 6 stitches and I'll meet up with you at the color change. I'm just finishing up this 6th stitch here, and then we want to pick up color A. So we want to cross the old yarn over the new yarn, and we're going to bring the yarn forward because we want to work that second stitch in our increase, and we're going to purl in the same stitch as we knitted that last or 6th knit stitch in color B. Here we can see that we've got an increase, so we've increased our stitch count by 1 more on this row. So we now should have 9 stitches on row 5. Row 6 is an easy row because we're just going to knit all of our colors as they present in row 5. So with color A, we're going to knit the last stitch on row 5, or that first stitch, however you want to look at it. Now we're going to pick up color B by crossing the old over the new, and again we're untangling the yarn on this even pass. Now we're going to give color B a tug to minimize that slack between the row. Now we'll knit all those stitches in color B. That would be 7 stitches just to make sure. And then we're going to do our color change again. We're crossing the old yarn over the new yarn. So we're going to pick up color A. We want to give that a little bit of a tug. Just to minimize the slack but not resize the stitch. And we're going to knit that last stitch. And again, our leads are all uncrossed on this even row pass. And we should still have 9 stitches because we didn't increase. At this point, we're done with the paw. So set it aside along with all 3 balls of the yarn that belong to it, and work the second paw with 3 new balls of yarn. When you're finished, return to work the belly in part 2 of our Intarsia and shaping segment. In part 2 of our second segment, we are going to work up the belly. But we're also going to be placing the 3 pieces, the 2 paws and the belly, and we're going to work a few rows to join these pieces together. So let's get started. With color A, we are going to begin by working a chain of 4. So there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now we're going to turn that chain upside down and we're going to knit through the back of those next 3 humps to give us 4 stitches on the 3rd row. So with the belly, I know this looks like the 1st row, but it'll make a lot more sense when we put it together because it's actually the 3rd row in the pattern. So when we join the pieces, it'll make more sense. So there we have our 3rd row, and on the 4th row, we're going to increase on each of those ends. So what we're going to do is we're going to purl that 1st stitch. So we'll bring the yarn forward to the front and purl. Now we want to wrap this tightly around the back, okay, and then work a knit stitch. So this is the first time we're actually not doing a color change here on our increase, so it's much easier, but we do want to make sure that we've got that yarn wrapped tightly around the stitch when bringing it from front to back before we knit that 2nd stitch. So now we're going to just knit the next 2 stitches, and we're going to turn that last chain as always, because for some reason it just gets twisted when we knit that 1st hump. So we're going to work a knit stitch here and then bring that working yarn forward tightly around the stitch, and then we'll knit that 2nd stitch for our last increase. Now on row 5, we are going to work another increase on the edges. So once I get done showing you that there are 2 stitches there, it's an increase. Oh, we actually have 6 stitches there now on that row. So on that row 4. So when we complete row 5, we'll have 8 stitches, but let's get there first. So we're going to keep the yarn forward and knit that 1st edge stitch. Then we're going to tightly wrap that around the back to knit for our 2nd stitch on the increase. Okay, it looks a little wonky, but trust me, it all works out. Okay, so there we've got our increase on the right edge of row 5, and we're just going to cut this lead here for a color change, and we won't be using this anymore, so that's why we're going to be cutting here. Okay, so let's cut that, and then we're going to grab a ball of color B. There we go, we've got that cut. And now we're going to bring in a new ball of color B. Give that a little bit of room by unraveling some yarn. Okay, so we're going to place old over new just to keep practicing that concept. And we're going to knit the next 4 stitches with this new color. Now, once we get to the 4th stitch, we will be cutting this lead as well because we won't be using it any longer. And then we're going to grab a whole new ball of color A to work our increase on that last stitch. So we'll go ahead and cut this lead, and then we're going to grab color A and work our last increase. So let's continue practicing our crossover. So we do old over the new, and we're going to knit that last stitch, then we'll wrap that yarn tightly towards the front to purl the 2nd stitch for our increase. And now we have 8 stitches on row 5. Now we're going to cut this lead as well, because on row 6 we are going to reintroduce color B, and all our stitches will be in color B. So let's cut this lead and bring in color B to knit that first stitch. And since we cut color A at the very end of the row, I like to just tie those together to keep them in place for the finishing work. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and just knit the rest of the stitches on this row, and don't cut the lead on the end. When I return, we will cover placement and joining all 3 pieces. It's time to put all these pieces together, including everything that comes with it. So here we have one of the paws, the first paw, and then we place the belly in the middle, and then the second paw we place to the right. So that's how they need to be lined up. Now, above the work, we need to have the leads in the order that they're worked, okay, for each of those pieces. So for this right paw, we have color A, color B, then color A again, and that's all for the right paw there. Okay, so now we're moving on to the belly, and the belly only has that one lead going into it, and that is color B. Now for the paw to the left, we have color A again. We've got color B, and then we have color A again. So we have 7 leads working into these 3 pieces that we will be joining on the 7th row. So let's get to it. On row 7, we're actually going to be increasing on both the edge stitch on the right paw and on the left paw. So we're purling this stitch, then we're tightly wrapping it to the back in order to create our second stitch for the increase by knitting through that same stitch. There we go, we've got our increase. And now we're going to cross the old yarn over the new yarn for the color change. And remember, this pass, these leads are going to stay crossed. So once we cross that over, we want to give us enough yarn. So we want to feed this yarn underneath color A to give us some yarn to work with. And before knitting that first stitch with color B, we want to give it a little tug to reduce that slack from the previous row without changing the size of that stitch. Now that we've made our first stitch, we're going to knit the next 6 stitches, and I'll meet back up with you at the color change. Here we are at the final color change on the right paw. Okay, so we will cross old yarn over new yarn, and we need to give that color A a little tug without changing the size of that stitch from the previous row. We're going to be changing colors again, and it's this color change where we'll be connecting this paw to the right to the belly. So again, we're going to cross the old yarn over the new yarn, and you can see when we cross, it's joining those 2 pieces very naturally, just like any other color change. So it's really easy to join these pieces. Okay, we want to feed enough yarn here under that lead of color A, and when we knit the first stitch, we want to give color B a nice little tug to minimize the slack from the stitch in the previous row to which we're connecting, okay? So we just want to make sure that it's a nice tight connection there. Now we'll knit these next 8 stitches and I'll meet back up with you at the color change. So here we are at the color change, and again, this is the place where we're going to join the belly to the paw on the left. So we're going to cross the old over the new, just like we always do, and that is going to join these two pieces together. So once we've crossed old over the new, first we're going to feed the yarn under color B so that we have some yarn to work with. Then we're going to make sure we have a nice tight connection with that first stitch on the left paw by giving a little tug without changing the size of that stitch, okay? And we're just going to knit that stitch. Then we're going to change color again. So again, we're going to cross old over new. Once we do that, we'll feed color B under color A. And my puppy has something to say about that. Then give color B a little tug to minimize that slack. And then we will knit those next 7 stitches and I'll meet back up with you at the color change. We're at the last color change for this row. So we're going to cross that old yarn over the new. And in this last stitch, we're actually going to increase on this edge. It's been a while since we've been at the right edge, so we may have forgotten, but we do have to increase. So we're going to just make sure we've got a nice tight connection here across. We're going to give that color A a little tug, and then we're just going to knit in that last stitch. Wrap the yarn tightly around the front of the work and then purl to create our second stitch of our increase. And we should now have a total of 28 stitches for row 7. You have just joined 3 separate pieces in order to continue working as one piece, so great job. Things are going to start moving a lot quicker now that we've actually completed the hardest part of this project, okay? So on row 8, we're just going to knit these first 2 stitches, continuing on with color A, and we're going to work our color change here by crossing the old yarn over the new. Now here, when we cross over, we are going to untangle that cross, which is nice. We're going to undo it. So let's go ahead and do that here. And with color B, we're going to give it a little tug before we start knitting the next 7 stitches. I'll meet back up with you at the color change. Now we're at the color change, so we're going to grab our 2 leads here and we're going to cross the old yarn over the new, and we'll be uncrossing these 2 leads. And with color A, we're actually going to knit the next 2 stitches, so we'll be knitting over color B with color A on that second stitch. So I'm going to give that a little tug on color A, making sure we don't change the size of that stitch, okay? And then we're going to knit that second stitch over color B. So we're at a color change again, and when we pick up our 2 leads here, we will notice that the old yarn is already over the new yarn. maybe we won't see that, but you will when you work it. So I didn't actually show you here. I show you in other places. So anyway, basically when that happens, you're just going to be picking up that new lead, and you got to pay attention to where that's coming from now. It's actually coming from that color stitch in color B right below the one we just knitted. So on the left leg there, when we tug a little bit, that's where it's going to pull from. So we want to make sure that we don't pull too tightly so that we keep the stitch the same size. Now with color B, we're going to knit the next 6 stitches. We're coming to the color change again, and now we see that we have a stitch to go over and up. So we're coming up and over 1 stitch in order to knit the next stitch with color A. And again, that is being knitted through color B. So when we give this stitch a tug, it's coming from this stitch here on the left leg. And again, when we tug, we want to make sure that it's not changing the shape or size, of that stitch of color A to the right. Now here we're knitting the next 2 stitches, and we're going to be changing color again to knit the next 7 stitches in color B. So we cross that old yarn over the new, give our color B lead a little tug to eliminate that slack, knit the next 7 stitches, and I'll meet back up with you at the color change. Let's grab our next 2 leads and we'll cross the old yarn over the new. We'll give a little tug and knit those last 2 stitches on the row to complete row 8. Now with the next 4 rows, rows 9, 10, 11, and 12, we're going to be knitting in pattern, which means you are going to knit the stitches as they present in color, okay? So if the stitch from the previous row is color A, make sure that you're using color A to knit that stitch, and the same goes for color B. Now also make sure that on the odd row passes, your leads are crossing and they stay crossed, and on your even row passes, you are untangling those crosses. I'll see you on row 13. In part 3 of segment 2, we'll be working the body, which includes the arms and is worked between rows 13 and 32. Now from here on, I will work every color change with you, and I will give you the number of stitches for every color change, but then I'm going to be advancing to the next color change, okay? I need to try to somehow get this tutorial at a reasonable length, so let's get to it. Continuing with color A, we'll knit these first 2 stitches, and then we're going to grab up the first 2 leads, crossing old over new. So we'll cross color A over color B. And once we feed a bit of color B under color A, we give color B a little tug, okay? Knit that first stitch along with the next 5 stitches. At this color change, we need to bring color B up and over 1 stitch. So it's going to be knitted in that next stitch, which is color B, okay? But we've got to cross these a little bit differently because they are kind of going over that stitch. There's a whole stitch between them. So we still want to cross old over new, but we want to kind of keep the color B close to where it is exiting its previous stitch, okay? So in doing that, we're going to see here on the back that color A is stretching quite a bit across the back of that stitch. And we still need to make sure that it lies tightly against the back, okay? But we don't want to cinch it up too much, or it's going to shrink our width if we do that. So we have to just be really careful when we give this particular color change a tug, because again, we want it tight against the back, but we don't want it cinching, causing less space for that stitch. So now we're going to knit the next 3 stitches with color A. Now I'm returning to this color change we just did because I want to show you a little something. So I like to stretch the work vertically where color changes occur to help the stitches settle the way I want them to. It's normal to see a bit of puckering, which is usually an indication that we're knitting too tight, right? But when working the Intarsia method, because we're crossing leads to link our stitches, there's a lot more extra yarn between those stitches than when there are no color changes across the row. This is why the width tends to be greater than a normal knitted piece using the same number of cast-on stitches. As you can see, the puckering disappears once I've manipulated those stitches along the color change by stretching it out a bit. Okay, back to where we're supposed to be here. We'll grab these next 2 leads, cross the old over the new, and this is a simple color change. So we're just going to feed some yarn through to give us some yarn to work with. Give that a little tug and then knit the next 6 stitches. At our next color change, we're going to grab our next 2 leads, crossing old over new. We've got another nice easy color change, and we'll knit, we're going to give that a little tug, right? And then we're going to knit the next 3 stitches. Let's grab our next 2 leads, and we can see here that because we actually added a stitch on that color A, the old is already over the new. So we just pick up our color B, and it's got to come across that whole stitch that we knitted in color A. So again, it's got to lie flat against the back of that work. So when we tug, we give it a little tug to kind of minimize that slack coming up to the new row from the previous row. But we want to make sure that we leave enough so that there's enough room for that stitch to lay between the stitch that was covered with color A. Okay, so here we can see it lies flat, but there's still room there behind that stitch. Very important. Now we'll knit the next 5 stitches for a total of 6 with color B. Now for these last 2 leads, we're going to cross old over new and give color B a little tug and just knit up those last 2 stitches. Continuing with color A, we're going to knit the next 3 stitches, and when we get to the color change, we're just going to cross that old yarn over the new, and we're going to tug on that color B, and notice that it's going to come here from that stitch on the left. Okay, we want to lay that tightly across the back, and when we pull, there it's coming from that stitch on the left. Now knit those next 5 stitches. Let's grab those next 2 stitches, or those 2 leads, and we will cross old over new, give color A a little tug to eliminate that slack, and knit the next 3 stitches. Let's grab those next 2 leads, and we're going to cross old over new. And once we do that, we will give color B a little tug as we uncross those leads. And we're going to make sure that we do not change the size of that stitch. Now we're going to knit the next 6 stitches. Let's grab our next 2 leads, crossing old over new, untangling that cross, and then give color B a nice little tug to reduce that slack without changing the shape from the stitch on the previous row. We're going to knit the next 3 stitches. Now let's pick up those next 2 leads, crossing the old over the new, and when we uncross them, we're going to give the color B a little tug, and we'll knit the next 5 stitches. Let's grab our last 2 leads and cross the old over the new, uncrossing the 2 leads. Now, since the new lead is coming from the stitch to the right on the previous row, make sure it lies really tight against the back of the work when knitting the next stitch. You can see here from color A, when we look behind the work, we can see that it's coming from that row below to that stitch to the right of the next stitch that we're needing to knit. Okay, now with the color A, we're going to knit the last 2 stitches. On row 15, we want to start curving the paws inward. So to begin shaping, we will decrease on each end of the row. Continuing with color A, we'll knit the first 2 stitches together, crossing the edge stitch over the second stitch to begin that inward curve to the left. Now, knit through both stitches, reducing our stitch count by 1 on this row, and then knit the next 2 stitches and cut this lead. Now, grab the next 2 leads. And here we can see that the old yarn is already over the new yarn. So we simply want to pick up the new yarn, make sure it's lying tightly against the back of the work, and knit the next 3 stitches. We're going to cut this lead as well. Grab the next 2 leads and we'll cross the cut lead over the new lead. Make sure it's lying tightly across the back of the work there, and we're bringing this color A over an entire stitch. So again, make sure you give it a little cinch, but it still needs enough room, okay, to be in its space. All right, now we're going to knit the next 3 stitches. Let's pick up the next 2 leads. We'll cross the old over the new. Make sure it's lying tightly across the back of the work there. So again, it's going across an entire stitch. And we're going to work the next 8 stitches with color B. Let's pick up those next 2 leads. Old is already crossed over the new. So just grab the new lead, making sure it lies tightly against the back of the work. And we're going to knit the next 3 stitches. We'll cut color A before grabbing those next 2 leads. The old is already crossed over the new, so we'll grab the new lead, making sure that it lies tightly up against the back of the work, because again, we're going over an entire stitch to knit the next one. And we'll knit the next 3 stitches. Now we'll cut color B, grab those next 2 leads, crossing the old over the new, making sure that lies tightly up against the back of the work, because again, we're going over an entire stitch. I know I sound like a broken record, but I think it's helpful when learning a new skill. So we'll work the next 2 stitches before we begin working the decrease on this side. Now to work the decrease on this side, we're going to place that edge stitch to the right over that stitch to the right to begin our inward curve to the right. And then we'll just knit through both of those stitches, decreasing the number of stitches we have on this row by 1. So now we have a total of 26 stitches on row 15, and only 3 leads feeding into the work. On row 16, we'll continue with color A, knitting the next 9 stitches. Now we'll grab those next 2 leads, crossing the old over the new, and with color B, we'll knit the next 8 stitches. And let's grab our last 2 leads, crossing old over new, and we're going to knit the next 9 stitches. Now I want to point out here that we're actually crossing our leads on this path, or on this pass, sorry, which is an even row pass, and that is because we cut a lot of leads on the previous row. So now we are changing that to crossing our leads and staying crossed on the even rows while uncrossing them on the odd rows at this point of time. For row 17, we will knit each stitch in the color it presents, making sure that when we do our color changes, we uncross those leads, okay? And I'll meet back up with you then on row 18. We're going to decrease on each end of row 18 to finish shaping the paws. So continuing with color A, we'll knit the first 2 stitches together, crossing the edge stitch over the second stitch to continue that inward curve to the right. Now knit through both stitches, reducing our stitch count by 1 on this row, and then we'll knit the next 6 stitches. Now we'll grab those next 2 leads. We'll cross old over new, and again we've got color A going over an entire stitch in order to, color B going over an entire stitch in order to knit that next stitch. So we want to make sure it's laying flat against the back of the yarn. Feed some yarn under color A so we can have some to work with, and we're going to knit the next 10 stitches. Here we are at our next color change, so we're going to grab our next 2 leads, and we can see that the old is already crossed over the new, so we're just going to pick up color A, and again it's coming over a full stitch, okay, in order to knit that next stitch. So make sure that it's real snug back there, but not too snug, okay? And then we're going to knit the last 6 stitches before working our decrease. Here we are at the decrease, so we're going to take that edge stitch and cross it over to the left to that stitch on the left. Now we're going to knit through both of those stitches to give it that inward curve to the left. We're now done shaping the paws, so with row 19, we're actually going to start increasing again in order to shape the arms. We're going to be working 2 increases on each side of row 19. So we're going to continue with color A and work our first increase by bringing the yarn to the front and purling that edge stitch, then wrapping that yarn to the back to knit the second stitch. And here we have our first increase. Now we want to work our second increase the same way. So we're going to bring our yarn to the front and we're going to purl that next stitch. And then we're going to wrap that yarn tightly around the back. Once I get there, we'll wrap it around the back and knit for our second increase. And then we'll just knit the next 4 stitches. We're now at our first color change. So we're going to cross the old over the new, and we can see that color B has a whole stitch to cover again when crossing those over. So we want to make sure it's really snug back there, but not too snug. By now you're probably repeating all of this with me. Anyway, so once you do that, we are going to knit the next 12 stitches. And now we're at our last color change, so we're going to grab those last 2 leads and cross the old over the new, which old is already over the new, so we're just going to pick up color B and we're going to knit the next 4 stitches. It's time to work our 2 increases here at the edge. So in the next stitch, we're going to bring the yarn to the, we're going to knit the stitch. Then we're going to bring the yarn to the front, wrap it tightly around while we purl for our first increase. And then we're going to do the exact same thing on that last edge stitch. We're going to knit through that edge stitch. Then we're going to take our working yarn and wrap it tightly around the front and through the back to purl, in giving us our second increase. Now we have a total of 28 stitches on row 19. We're going to be increasing again on the edge stitches for row 20, so we'll continue with color A, and we're going to purl that edge stitch first. Then we're going to wrap our yarn around the back tightly to knit into that same stitch. So we've just increased our count by 1. We're going to knit the next 7 stitches, and I want to point something out here because sometimes when you increase, that increased stitch sometimes hides out in the back and we miss it. I do it quite a bit actually, and I've been doing this for years and years. So I've learned that I always need to kind of check and make sure that I am getting all my stitches when I'm working increases on the rows. Okay, so just something for you to think about and to put into practice early on so you don't keep making mistakes like that like I have. Okay, so we're going to cut this lead because we don't need it anymore. And once we do that, we'll grab both leads and cross that cut end over the new. Give color B a tug without changing the size of its stitch, and then we'll knit the next 12 stitches. Before changing color, we're going to go ahead and cut this lead, and then once we do that, we'll cross the old yarn over the new. Let's give color A a little tug. We'll knit the next 7 stitches. And remember to pay attention to those last 4 stitches from the increases from the previous row, so you don't miss a stitch. Then, finally, we're going to increase by knitting 1, then purling 1 in the last stitch. So, wrapping it tightly around as we push it through the back to purl. Now we have a total of 30 stitches on row 20, and we only have 1 lead left feeding into the work. Continuing with color A, we're going to work the first 6 stitches. Now, I'm going to get back to making the odd rows my crossing pass with the new leads we'll be introducing, so they will untangle on the return pass for the even rows. So to do that, we're going to place the tail end of color B to the left of the lead from color A, then draw color B under color A, feeding it through to have enough yarn to work the next 18 stitches. And I'll meet back up with you at the next color change. We're going to do the same thing, introducing color A back into the work. So place the tail end of color A to the left of the lead from color B. Then draw color A under color B to the right and feed it through enough to knit the last 6 stitches. Now we're back to 3 leads feeding into our work. Row 22 is an easy row because we're just going to knit each stitch in the color it presents, uncrossing those leads on the color changes. So you're just going to knit color A stitches with color A, and you're going to knit color B stitches with color B. I'll see you on row 23. For row 23, we'll continue with color A, knitting the first 7 stitches. Here we are at the color change, and we'll grab these 2 leads. Since old is already crossed over the new, we're going to pick up the new, making sure it's lying tightly across the back of that work, because we've got 1 whole stitch to go over, or cover I should say, and then we're going to knit the next 16 stitches. Here we are at the last color change, so we'll grab those last 2 leads, cross old over new, making sure that that new lead lies tightly against the back of the work, because it's got to cover an entire stitch in order to knit that next stitch. And we'll knit the last 7 stitches with color A. The next row is another easy one for us, so we're going to knit row 24 as the colors present, remembering to uncross the leads as you change color. And I'll meet back up with you for row 25. Row 25 is a decrease row to begin shaping the arms inward on either side. So continuing with color A, let's knit the first 2 stitches together, crossing that edge stitch over the second stitch to begin that inward curve to the left. Now we'll knit the next 6 stitches. Then we need to grab our 2 leads. Since our old is already crossed over the new, we'll pick up color B and feed enough yarn under the old lead to work up the next 14 stitches. We're at the color change again, and we'll grab these next 2 leads, crossing old over new, and make sure that the new lead lies tightly against the back of the work, and we'll knit the next 6 stitches with color A. Now we're at the end, and we need to decrease these last 2 stitches into 1 by crossing the edge stitch over that stitch to the right of the edge stitch, then knitting through both of those stitches, decreasing the stitch count by 1 more, and leaving us with a total of 28 stitches on row 25. We'll continue with color A for row 26 by knitting the first 7 stitches. Then at the color change, we'll grab the 2 leads, crossing old over new, and give the new yarn a little tug. That would be color B, and we'll knit the next 14 stitches. Here we are at the color change again. So we'll grab these last 2 leads, crossing old over new, giving the new lead a tug, and knit the next 7 stitches with color A. We have another easy row with row 27. As if we have so many so far, right? Anyway, we're gonna knit those as the colors present, and we'll meet back up for row 28. Okay, so here we are at row 28, which is a decrease row, because we're going to continue shaping the arms inward on either side. So we'll continue with color A to knit the first 2 stitches together, and we'll knit the next 6 stitches. Here we are at the color change. We'll grab these next 2 leads. Since our old is already crossed over the new, we'll just pick up that new lead and knit the next 12 stitches. Here we are again at our next color change. So we'll grab these next 2 leads and cross the old over the new, making sure that lead is nice and snug up against the back of the work, and we'll knit the next 6 stitches with color A. Now let's decrease these last 2 stitches into 1 by crossing the edge stitch over the stitch beside it, causing a curve to the left, and then knit through both stitches, decreasing the stitch count again by 1, leaving us with a total of 26 stitches on row 28. Continuing with color A, we'll knit the next 7 stitches on row 29. Now we're going to cut that lead across the old lead over the new and give color B a tug. Then knit the next 12 stitches and cut the lead here across the cut lead over the new and give the new a tug before knitting the last 7 stitches. Row 30 is another decrease row, so we'll continue with color A to knit the first 2 stitches together, crossing the edge stitch over the second stitch to continue that inward curve to the right. Now knit through both those stitches, reducing our stitch count by 1 on this row, and we'll knit the next 3 stitches. Here we are at a color change where we actually need to reintroduce color B. This is the uncrossing pass for our leads, so we'll just place the tail end of color B under and to the left of the lead for color A. Then we'll knit the next 16 stitches. Here again, we have another color change where I am tongue-tied, where we'll reintroduce color A the same way we did color B. So we're just going to place the tail of color A under and to the left of the lead for color B. Now we'll just knit the next 3 stitches, and here we are at the decrease. So we're going to cross that edge stitch over the stitch to the left, knit through both stitches, decreasing the stitch count by 1 more, leaving us with a total of 24 stitches on row 30. Continue with color A by knitting the first 3 stitches on row 31. I'm cutting this lead, but that's my mistake, so please don't do that. Do not cut this lead. Cross your old yarn over your new. Make sure that color B is nice and snug against the back of the work before knitting the next 18 stitches. Here we are at the next color change, so we'll cross the old over new, feeding that new yarn through, making sure color A is lying tightly against the back of the work before knitting the last 3 stitches. Okay, so here I am checking out my work, and I'm noticing a hole where I ran out of yarn and had to grab another ball of color B. Now, I like to keep my mistakes that I make while recording in the knit-alongs because I think it's a really good learning opportunity. Learn from my mistakes, not yours, okay? So, I'm checking out the back, and here we can see that the tail end of color B is not crossed with that stitch from color B. And we can fix that right here by feeding the tail end through the top of that knit stitch in color A, which should have originally been trapped in the first place. So what we're doing here is just creating the slack between those 2 stitches where I had to grab a new ball of yarn. So voila, no more hole, yay. Let's go ahead and continue with color A to knit those first 2 stitches together, crossing the edge stitch over the second stitch to continue that inward curve to the right. Now knit through both stitches, reducing our stitch count by 1 on this row, and cut this lead. Cross the cut end over the new, making sure that color B is nice and snug against the back of the work, and knit the next 20 stitches with color B. Now I have to add a new lead of color A here, but you'll just need to cross old over new and knit the last 2 stitches together by crossing the edge stitch over that stitch to the left. Then knit through both stitches, decreasing the stitch count by 1 more, leaving us with a total of 22 stitches on row 32. And we will cut this lead. So we have just completed the body work. Yay! I know that took a long time. Great job. Now, in the next segment, we're going to start working the head, and I'm going to be speeding things up. I'm hoping that you're catching on to the color changes and how to make sure that you're making those connections between the color changes so there aren't any holes in the work, okay? And I'll be skipping over a lot of the explanatory stuff like how to perform your decrease, things like that. So I'll see you in the next segment. Here we are at part 4 of segment 2, where we're going to work the head of our panda. This is going to be fun because we're actually going to be working in the eyes and the nose on the panda, so we will be doing some more Intarsia work here, but it will go a lot faster because we got a lot of white that we're going to be knitting as well. So let's get to it. On row 33, all our stitches will be worked in color B. So to work that first stitch, we're going to cross that cut end of color A over color B, making sure that color B is nice and snug against the back of the work, and then we're going to just knit across the row for the next 21 stitches for a total of 22 stitches. So I will meet back up with you on row 34. On row 34, we're going to begin shaping the head, so we need to start increasing on each of the edges. Continuing with color B, we're going to increase by purling 1 and then knitting 1 in the first stitch. Then we're going to knit the next 20 stitches, and then when we get to the last stitch, we're going to increase that as well on the right, that last right edge stitch, and we're going to increase in that stitch by knitting 1 and then purling 1. So we will then have 24 stitches on row 34. I will see you again on row 35. We're going to increase again on row 35. So continuing with color B, we'll purl 1, then knit 1 in that first stitch. Then we're going to knit the next 22 stitches across and increase again on that last stitch by knitting 1 and then purling 1 in the same stitch. So at the end of row 35, we will have 26 stitches. I'll see you for row 36. On row 36, we're just going to simply knit all the way across. So you will have, again, 28 stitches. And I'll meet back up with you for row 37. We're going to increase again on row 37. So continuing with color B, we'll purl 1 and knit 1 in that first stitch. Then we're going to knit the next 24 stitches, and we'll increase again in that last stitch by knitting 1 and purling 1 in that same stitch. For row 37, we now have 28 stitches. Now row 38, we're just going to knit across. So we'll just knit all 28 stitches, and I'll meet back up with you for row 39. We'll be increasing again on row 39. So continuing with color B, we'll purl 1, then knit 1 in that first stitch. Then we'll knit the next 26 stitches, and then we'll increase in the last stitch by knitting 1, then purling 1 in that same stitch, leaving us with 30 stitches on row 39. Continuing with color B, knit across for row 40, and I'll meet back up with you for row 41. 41 is another increase row, so we'll continue with color B to purl 1, then knit 1 in that first stitch. Then knit the next 28 stitches. Then we'll go ahead and increase in the last stitch by knitting 1, then purling 1 in that same stitch. We now have 32 stitches. On row 42, we're going to start working the eyes. So we will be having 5 leads feeding into this row. So first and foremost, we're going to just continue with color B to knit those first 6 stitches. Now we've gotten to the color change, and we're going to introduce a new strand of color A and knit 2 stitches. Carrying color B across the row to work our next stitches is a big problem when using the Intarsia technique, even if it's only 1 stitch, let alone 2. So we're going to introduce a new strand of color B to knit the next 16 stitches. Carrying stitches across the row is an entirely different technique called the Fair Isle technique, and it is a messy one, which is why when you use Intarsia, it gets messy if you start carrying those leads across the row instead of up and over to the next row, okay? Now, if you do end up carrying a lead across the row, it also messes up your crossing passes because you're crossing over multiple leads, which causes a lot of problems with tangling the yarn, and that's where a lot of the frustration comes in when working Intarsia projects, because this is the one rule people have trouble following for some reason. I used to as well, but it took me a few projects and I finally figured out what I was doing wrong. And when I say a few, I mean many. So hopefully I can spare you a lot of frustration with this little tip. Okay, so moving on, we're going to introduce a new strand of color A and knit the next 2 stitches. Then at the next color change, we're going to introduce a new strand of color B to knit the last 6 stitches. And we should now have 5 leads feeding into our work. On row 43, we're going to begin working the nose between the eyes. So we'll be adding more leads. Continuing with color B, let's knit those first 5 stitches. At the color change, cross old over new, then knit the next stitch. Now this is where we introduced a new strand of color B on the previous row. So we want to feed the tail end through the top of the knit stitch where color A from the previous row is coming from to close that hole. And with color A, knit the next 3 stitches for a total of 4 stitches of this lead. Next, grab the next 2 leads, crossing old over new. Check to make sure the tail end on that new lead is trapped. Mine is not, but I'm going to show you a different way to trap it. In this particular case, we can just cross it over color B, just like we did the old over the new, okay? And that will trap that color A that we introduced in the previous row. Now knit the next 6 stitches. Here's where we're going to insert a new lead of color A to begin forming the nose to grab color B. Here's where we're going to insert a new lead of color A to begin forming the nose. So grab color A, place the tail end to the left of color B's lead, cross old over new, and knit the next 2 stitches. Now we'll go ahead and insert a new lead of color B. Just place the tail end to the left of color A and feed the new strand under the old enough to knit the next 6 stitches. Here we are at the next color change, so we'll grab these next 2 leads. Again, we're at a point where a new lead was introduced on the previous row. Just across both the tail end of color B along with the lead from color B, which is the old yarn, over the new, making sure color A is lined tightly against the back of the work, and then knit those next 4 stitches. After checking, we can see that the hole has been closed. Now let's grab those next 2 leads, crossing old over new, and again, after checking the new lead on color A, we can see there's a gap that we need to close. So we're just going to cross this end over the new strand, which is color B, and knit those last 5 stitches. We now have 7 leads feeding into the work. We'll continue with color B by working an increase in that first stitch. So it'll be purl 1 and knit 1 in that same stitch, and we'll knit the next 4 stitches. At the color change, grab the 2 leads, cross old over new, and knit the next 5 stitches with color A. Grab the 2 leads at the next color change. Old is already crossed over new, so just pick up color B and knit the next 4 stitches. At the color change, cross old over new and knit the next 4 stitches. At the color change, just pick up that color B and knit the next 4 stitches. Grab the next 2 leads and knit the next 5 stitches. Perform the next color change and work the next 4 stitches with color B. Then work an increase on the edge stitch by knitting 1, then purling 1 in the same stitch. There are now 34 stitches on this row. We'll begin row 45 by continuing with color B and knitting the first 6 stitches. At the color change, knit the next 5 stitches with color A. At the next color change, knit the next 3 stitches with color B. After that, with color A, knit the next 6 stitches. With color B, knit the next 3 stitches. Changing again to color A, we'll knit the next 5 stitches. And then changing again to color B, we knit the last 6 stitches. Continuing with color B, we'll knit the next 5 stitches on row 46. At the next color change, we'll cross old over new and work the next 7 stitches. At the next color change, just pick up color B and work the next 3 stitches. Grab those next 2 leads and knit the next 4 stitches with color A. At the next color change, we'll knit 3 stitches with color B. So grab the next 2 leads and knit the next 7 stitches with color A. Finally, at the last color change, we're just going to pick up color B and knit the last 5 stitches. Continuing with color B, we'll knit those first 5 stitches on row 47. Grab those first 2 leads and knit the next 7 stitches with color A. At this next color change, knit the next 4 stitches with color B. Now we're going to cut this lead and pick up color A to knit the next 2 stitches. Now I've run out of yarn here, so I need to add a new small strand for this last stitch on the nose, and then we'll cut this lead. Grab these next 2 leads and knit the next 4 stitches with color B. At this next color change, we'll knit the next 7 stitches with color A. And again at the final 2 leads, we'll knit the next 5 stitches in color B. We now have just 5 leads feeding into our work. Continuing with color B, we'll knit the first 5 stitches on row 48. Then we'll grab these first 2 leads and knit the next 7 stitches with color A. Here we are at the next color change, so we'll pick up color B and knit the next 10 stitches. One thing about Intarsia is that mistakes are going to happen at the color changes, especially when introducing new leads to your work. I like to check each end as I pass over to make sure it's trapped and there's not a hole between its 2 stitches. This isn't fail-proof, but it does reduce the chances of having a hole between those stitches tremendously. If you're anything like me, I get sidetracked easily, so I'm often disrupted during my projects, which leaves extra room for mistakes. So it's a good practice to implement if you're new to the Intarsia method. Here I found a hole as I'm stretching out my vertical columns on the nose. So I just need to feed that tail end through the top of that stitch to the right to create the slack and close up that hole. I check for holes in the work when I get to my finishing work as well. This has worked very well for me as I haven't had any Intarsia project unravel on me yet. Okay, let's get our next 2 leads here, which are actually crossing because we removed 2 leads between them. So we need to untangle it ourselves to keep this an uncrossed pass. So with color A, knit the next 7 stitches. At this next color change, knit the last 5 stitches with color B. We'll continue with color B to knit the first 4 stitches on row 49. We'll grab those next 2 leads and work the next 8 stitches in color A. Here we are at the color change again, and we'll knit the next 10 stitches with color B. Here at the next color change, we'll knit the next 8 stitches with color A. And finally, at the last color change, we will knit the last 4 stitches with color B. On row 50, we'll be increasing again. So we're going to purl 1, then knit 1 in that first stitch. Then knit the next 3 stitches. Grab those first 2 leads and knit the next 8 stitches with color A. At the next color change, grab color B to knit the next 10 stitches. At the next color change, knit the next 8 stitches with color A. Just grab those last 2 leads and knit the next 3 stitches with color B, and then in that last stitch work our increase, which will be knit 1, then purl 1 in that same stitch. So we now have a total of 36 stitches on row 50. Continuing with color B, we'll knit the first 5 stitches, grab up these next 2 leads, and with color A, knit the next 9 stitches. At the next color change, pick up color B and knit the next 8 stitches. At the next color change, we'll knit the next 9 stitches with color A. Now at our last color change, we'll knit the last 5 stitches with color B. Continuing with color B, we'll knit the 4 first stitches on row 52. At this first color change, we'll knit the next 10 stitches with color A. Here we are at the next color change. We'll knit the next 8 stitches with color B. At this color change, we'll knit the next 10 stitches with color A. Here we are at the last color change. We'll knit the last 4 stitches with color B. Well, apparently Alexa's not too sure about that. Anyhow, rows 53 and 54 will be knitted as the colors present. I'll see you for row 55. For row 55, we'll continue with color B to knit the first 4 stitches. At the first color change, we'll grab color A and knit the next 11 stitches. At this color change, we'll pick up color B and knit the next 6 stitches. And we'll grab these next 2 leads, and with color A, knit the next 11 stitches. Here we are at the last color change, and we'll knit those last 4 stitches with color B. Rows 56 and 57 will be knitted as the colors present. So I'll meet back up with you for row 58. We'll continue with color B on row 58 to knit those first 5 stitches. On that first color change, we'll just pick up color A and knit the next 10 stitches. At the next color change, we will knit the next 6 stitches with color B. Grab these next 2 leads and knit the next 10 stitches with color A. Now we're at the final color change for this row, and we'll knit the last 5 stitches with color B. We'll be decreasing on the edges of the row for row 59. So with color B, we'll knit the first 2 stitches together, then we'll knit the next 3 stitches. At the first color change, we'll knit the next 9 stitches with color A. Grab those next 2 leads, and we'll knit the next 8 stitches with color B. Grab those next 2 leads and knit the next 9 stitches now with color A. Then on the final color change, we'll knit the next 3 stitches, and then we will decrease by knitting those last 2 stitches together for a total of 34 stitches on row 59. Moving on to row 60, we will continue with color B and knit the first 5 stitches. Then we'll grab those first 2 leads, pick up color A, and knit the next 8 stitches. At the next color change, we'll knit the next 8 stitches again, this time with color B. And again at this next color change, we're going to knit the next 8 stitches only in color A. Here we are at the last 2 leads, and with color B, we'll knit those last 5 stitches. On row 61, we will continue with color B to knit those first 6 stitches. Then at the first color change, we'll just pick up color A and knit the next 7 stitches. Here we are at the next color change, and we will pick up color B to knit the next 8 stitches. Grab our next 2 leads and knit the next 7 stitches with color A. And the last 2 leads, we'll knit the next 6 stitches with color B. Now row 62 is a nice and easy one. You'll just knit as the colors present. So I will meet back up with you for row 63. Continuing with color B, we will knit the first 7 stitches on row 63. Grab those first 2 leads, pick up color A, and work the next 6 stitches. At the next color change, knit the next 8 stitches with color B. Grab these next 2 leads and knit the next 6 stitches with color A. Here at the last 2 leads, we'll knit the last 7 stitches with color B. On row 64, we're going to be working the ears at the edges of the head. So let's introduce a new lead of color A just on that first stitch. Now grab the first 2 leads and knit the next 7 stitches with color B. Here at the next color change, knit the next 4 stitches with color A. Grab these next 2 leads and knit the next 10 stitches with color B. At the next color change, pick up color A and knit the next 4 stitches, and at the last 2 leads, we'll knit the next 7 stitches with color B, and now we'll introduce a new strand of color A to knit that last stitch on the row. We now have 7 leads feeding into our work. Continue with color A to knit the first stitch on row 65. Then we'll grab those first 2 leads, and remember we inserted that new strand of color A, so we need to put that cut strand or that tail end over color B, just as we put the old yarn of color A over color B. So now we'll knit the next 8 stitches with color B. Now we'll cut this lead, even though I missed it initially. Okay, we'll grab the next 2 leads, pick up color A to knit the next 2 stitches. We'll cut color A here too. At the next color change, knit the next 12 stitches with color B. We're going to cut this lead as well. At the next color change, pick up color A and work the next 2 stitches. Cut this lead. Grab the next 2 leads and knit the next 8 stitches with color B. At the last color change, knit the last stitch with color A. We should now have 3 leads feeding into our work. But as you can see, I have 4 with 2 of color B side by side. 2 of the same color should never be side by side when working the Intarsia method, so this automatically tells me I've made a mistake somewhere. This is where I initially forgot to cut color B in the beginning of the row, so I'll just cut it now and we'll move on. Continuing with color A, we'll knit the first stitch on row 66, and then we'll grab those first 2 leads and knit the next 32 stitches with color B. Now our ends that were cut from the previous row should all be trapped, so we shouldn't have to worry about any holes on this pass, okay? Now at the last color change, we will grab color A and knit that last stitch. On row 67, we're going to increase on the ends to begin shaping the ears. So continuing with color A, we'll work an increase in that first stitch by purling one, then knitting one in the same stitch. We'll knit one more, then grab our first 2 leads, and with color B, we will knit the next 30 stitches. At that last color change, we'll pick up color A and knit one, then work our increase in the last stitch by knitting one and then purling one in that same stitch. Now we're back to 36 stitches on this row. We've got a nice easy row in 68, because we're just going to knit the colors as they present. So I'll meet back up with you for row 69. Continuing with color A, knit the first 4 stitches on row 69. Let's grab those first 2 leads. We'll pick up color B and knit the next 28 stitches. Now coming back to that last color change, we'll pick up color A and knit those last 4 stitches. Again, we've got a nice and easy row in row 70 because we're just going to knit the colors as they present. So I'll meet back up with you for row 71. Continuing with color A, we'll knit the first 5 stitches on row 71. At the first color change, we'll pick up color B and knit the next 26 stitches. Now at the last color change, we'll pick up color A and knit the last 5 stitches. We'll continue with color A to knit the first 6 stitches on row 72. At that first color change, pick up color B and work the next 24 stitches. At the last color change, pick up color A and knit the last 6 stitches. Again, continuing with color A, we'll knit the first 7 stitches on row 73. We'll pick up those 2 leads and with color B, work the next 22 stitches. And at this last color change, we'll pick up color A and knit the last 7 stitches. Continuing with color A, we'll knit these first 8 stitches on row 74. At the first color change, we'll pick up color B and work the next 20 stitches. Now at the last color change, we'll pick up color A and knit the last 8 stitches. Continuing again with color A, we'll knit the first 9 stitches on row 75. Grab these first 2 leads and pick up color B to knit the next 18 stitches. Then at the last color change, we'll pick up color A to knit the last 9 stitches on the row. We're going to be decreasing on row 76 to start shaping those ears inward. So continuing with color A, we'll knit the first 2 stitches together by crossing that first stitch over the front of the second stitch and then knitting through both stitches. Now we'll knit the next 8 stitches. Then we're going to cut this lead. Now at the color change, we're going to grab that color B and we're going to knit the next 16 stitches. We're going to cut this lead at the end. At the next color change, we'll pick up color A and knit the next 8 stitches. Then we'll work our decrease on these last 2 stitches and we'll have 34 stitches on this row with just the 1 lead feeding into the work. On row 77, we're going to be binding off all of our stitches in color B for the panda's head. But first, let's continue with color A to knit those first 11 stitches. So here I'm noticing a hole where I had cut color B on the previous row, and so I want to repair that right now. So I'm just going to take that cut lead and feed it through the top of that stitch to close that gap. And it's closed. Yay. So moving on. Here we're going to reintroduce color B and start binding off the next 11 stitches, which I'm going to work with you because binding off a section in between a row can get a little confusing. So here we're going to knit the next stitch with color B and we'll knit the next stitch as well. Now we're going to make this loop a little bit larger, and there we've just bound off 1 stitch. Now we'll knit the third stitch, make the previous loop a little bigger, bind off that second stitch. Now we're binding off the third stitch. Here we are binding off the fourth stitch. Now we're binding off the fifth stitch. Now we're binding off the sixth stitch. This will be the seventh stitch. Now we're binding off the eighth stitch. Here's the ninth stitch. Now we're binding off the 10th stitch. There we've bound off the 11th stitch. And we're going to cut the tail end on this to finish off, which includes drawing that tail end all the way through to finish off that 12th stitch, bind it off, and then we're going to just shove it right down where it came from. Here we're going to reintroduce color A to knit the last 11 stitches on the row. We still want to cross these two leads so there's not a hole between these stitches. We now have only two leads feeding into the work. The only active stitches remaining on row 77 are those for the ears, which we will continue with in part 5. In part 5, we are wrapping up our Intarsia and shaping segment, where we will complete each of the ears of our panda separately. Let's get to it. Continuing with color A, we'll first work the left ear by knitting all 11 stitches. Then we'll move to the right and do the same. On row 79, we're going to continue shaping the ears by decreasing on the edges. So on the right ear, knit the first 2 stitches together to the left, knit the next 7 stitches, and then knit those last 2 stitches together to the right. We have 9 stitches on this ear. Now we'll do the same thing on the left ear. Knit the first 2 stitches together to the left, knit those next 7 stitches, then knit the last 2 stitches together to the right. For row 80, we're just going to knit across for each ear. On row 81, we'll continue to shape the ears by decreasing at the edges. So knit the first 2 stitches together to the left, knit the next 5 stitches, then we'll knit the last 2 stitches on the right ear to the right. Now let's do the same on the left ear. We'll knit those first 2 stitches together to the left, knit the next 5 stitches, then we'll knit the next 2 stitches together to the right. We have 7 stitches on each ear. On row 82, we're going to decrease again. So let's knit those first 2 stitches together to the right. Then we'll knit the next 3 stitches, and then knit the last 2 stitches together to the left. Now let's do the same thing for the right ear. Knit those first 2 stitches together to the right, then knit the next 3 stitches, and knit those last 2 stitches together to the left. We now have 5 stitches on each ear. Now we'll be binding off the ears, but we're going to continue shaping. So on the right ear, knit the first 2 stitches together to the left. Then let's bind this stitch off tight. Next, we'll knit the last 2 stitches together and bind off tight again. Now we'll finish off completely on this right ear. We'll do the same on the left ear now. Knit those first 2 stitches together to the left and bind this stitch off tight. Then knit the last 2 stitches together, bind off tight again, and finish off. Now would be a good time to complete most of the finishing work thus far. That was hard work. You've just completed the Intarsia and shaping segment of the follow along, which is no simple task. Here's what our little guy looks like so far. Take some time to soak in what you've accomplished before moving on to segment 3, where we'll get to all the fun detailing work. You should be super proud right now. Great job. Welcome to segment 3, and congratulations on making it this far. In part 1 of our detailing segment, we will be completing the head of our panda. So let's go. We're going to start detailing by bordering the head, which includes single crochet along the edge and surface stitching between the head and ears along with the head and body. We're going to start where the right arm meets the right side of the head. Now I have the panda folded with the right side of the head showing so I can better show you where we're going to join color B to get started. We want to join color B in this first stitch right above the arm. To do that, we need to insert a new strand of color B between the legs of the last stitch on the right arm. So let's grab our new yarn and get to it. We'll just feed that through and boom, we have our join. Easy peasy, yeah? Okay, so now we're just going to single crochet along the edge of the head until we get to where the head meets the ear. So we want to single crochet in that first stitch on the head. When working along the edge, just use the size of your loop to determine which edge stitch you want your next single crochet to go through. Make sure you work through both of those legs on the edge stitches. As you get about 10 or so stitches worked, check to make sure you have a good tension along the edge so far. Once we get to the ear, we're going to begin surface stitching until we reach the end of the ear. So we're basically creating slip stitches on the surface. These stitches hide the color change between the head and the ear for a smoother finish. Use the length of the loop to determine where to draw the yarn through the back, then pull up a loop through that loop. Continue until you reach the end of the ear. I do a lot of readjusting of my stitches along the way so they cover what I want them to. Now we're going to begin single crocheting again along the border until we get to the next ear, where we'll begin to surface stitch again to hide that color change between the ear and the head. So again, use the size of the loop to determine where to draw that loop up from the back and bring it up through that loop. Continue working your surface stitches until you reach the end of the ear. We'll continue by single crocheting along the edge until we reach the left arm. Now we'll begin surface stitching right along the color change to smooth that out. Once we get to the end of the arm, we need to verify stitch placement by checking the back of the work, so this part takes a bit longer. We want our stitches to run straight across to the other arm. The yarn feeding through the back will help us keep that straight. Here we can see I'm up a stitch too high on the other side, so I need to adjust. This happens often as I work this section, so this is an important step to keep your surface stitching from zigzagging between the head and the body. Now, once we reach the next arm, we can use the color change as a guide, so we'll continue surface stitching until we reach the stitch just before the one where we joined our yarn. You want to cut a bit of a longer tail to connect this last surface stitch to our first single crochet. Next, we'll detail the ears. In part 2 of our detailing segment, we will be single crocheting a border around the ears. So here we go. To get started, let's position the panda to begin detailing the right ear. We want to join color A between the legs of that first stitch on the right. Now, begin single crocheting along the edge, making sure to pass through both legs when working the stitches. Also, check your tension along the way as well to keep it even. When you get to the stitch just before the last edge stitch, finish off cutting a longer tail to connect the two stitches seamlessly. Now do the exact same thing on the left ear, working in the same direction from right to left. I'll meet back up with you in part 3 where we'll detail the eyes. In part 3 of our detailing segment, we are going to be working several different methods to detail the eyes. So we'll be surface stitching, we'll also be doing a little embroidery, and we'll be doing some duplicate stitching as well. So let's get started. With color B, we're going to create the pupils of the eye by working 2 duplicate stitches vertically. We'll begin with the left eye on the far right column of 4 stitches in color A. From the bottom stitch, go up 1 stitch and over 3, which will be the 4th column of the eye from the right. Now, we want to push the tail end of about a 15-inch strand of color B between the legs of the stitch just below this stitch. Then, we'll follow the path of the stitch up to the right, behind both legs of the stitch right above, then back down on the left between the legs of the stitch below the one we're duplicating. To duplicate the stitch above that, insert the tail end between the legs of the duplicate stitch we just made. Bring the strand up to the right and behind both legs of the stitch above. Then back down on the left between the legs of the first duplicate stitch we made. We now have 2 duplicate stitches for the pupil. Repeat this for the right eye, and I'll meet back up with you to work the embroidery around the pupil. We'll begin our embroidery around the left pupil by using a strand of color B about 25 to 30 inches long. Now, I like to use a smaller weight yarn to outline where I'd like the embroidery to go, but if you're good at eyeballing things, pun intended, that works too. I'm going to take my smaller weight yarn and form a circle around the pupil, pushing the yarn down through every couple stitches or so they stay put better. I go down 2 stitches from the bottom peak of the first duplicate stitch, but it's really up to you how you want to do this part. I take my time here because I'm too much of a darn perfectionist. Certainly not one of my better qualities. Okay, finally done with that. Now I'm just going to push the tail end of my strand of yarn through my first stitch and feed it single stranded down through the next place I marked with my smaller weight yarn, coming back up no more than 1/2 stitch over or diagonally, whichever looks best where you're at in the process. That equates to just one strand between strand exit, front to back, and entrance, back to front. Continue threading the yarn in this manner until you meet up with the tail end from the beginning of the embroidery. Remove the strand of smaller weight yarn if you used it, and snip any extra off the tail end in the back. Now do the same thing on the right eye, and I'll meet back up with you to work the surface stitching around the entire eye. Using color A, we're now going to work surface stitches around the left eye between the color changes to smooth it all out, giving it a more polished look. I'm starting here at the bottom, but you can start anywhere you'd like. We're just going to use a ball of yarn and drop a loop through the back of the work right between a color change. Then we'll just continue to thread the strand through the back to drop a loop through the previous open loop. I like to make these stitches on the smaller side to fully cover the stitches surrounding the eye, but it's entirely up to you. You do what you think is best. That's the beauty of working with yarns. There's no one way to make something beautiful. Continue surface stitching until you're one stitch from the first surface stitch. Once there, cut a long tail and connect it to the first surface stitch by feeding the tail end through both legs of the first surface stitch. Then down back between the legs of the last surface stitch worked. Do the same thing for the right eye now, and I'll meet back up with you in part 4 to start on the nose. In part 4 of our detailing segment, we are going to do a little bit of surface stitching on the nose, and we're also going to add a duplicate stitch to give it a little sparkle. Here we go. We're going to start by first working a duplicate stitch on the nose using color B. So we'll need about 7 to 10 inches of yarn to get started. First, we want to find the center of the nose, which happens to be between two stitch columns. We want to duplicate the 4th stitch up from the bottom just right of center. To do that, we count 3 stitches up, and this is where we'll thread our yarn to begin the duplicate stitch. So let's grab our strand of yarn and we'll push it between the legs of the stitch below to begin. Now bring the strand up on the right to follow the path of the stitch we're duplicating and feed it behind both those legs of the stitch above. Then draw the strand down on the left and push the tail end between the legs of the stitch below. Now both ends of this duplicate stitch are in the same exact stitch, which means we need to do some weaving to get them ready for joining when it comes time to do the finishing work. So let's clip any excess, but make sure to keep a long enough tail for a little bit of weaving. Let me get this fully turned over to give you a better view. We want to weave each strand on either side of the stitch back up to the top of the duplicate stitch where it can be successfully joined. We're just going to go under this strand here to the left, then straight up and under the strand right above it, and we'll do the same on the right side here. And now it's ready to be joined. Okay, so We're also going to surface stitch around the nose between those color changes using color A, just as we did for the eyes. So once you get to the stitch before the first surface stitch, finish off and draw the tail end behind both the legs of the first surface stitch, then down between the last one to make that connection between the two. We're on to part 5 of our detailing segment where we're going to be embroidering the mouth. So here we go. To embroider the mouth, we're going to need 2 separate strands of color A, one about 20 inches and another about 16 inches long. Now, to embroider the mouth, we need to locate the center of the nose once more. With the longer strand of yarn, push the tail end between the 2 stitch columns just right under the surface stitch from the nose. Create 3 broken stitches straight down the center. We want to begin curving the mouth with the 4th stitch, so angle it down diagonally to the left. For the next stitch, angle it slightly downward to the left, only flatter than the stitch before. Now, grab your other strand of yarn to begin stitching the right side of the mouth. We're going to insert the tail end right where that 4th stitch begins and angle it down diagonally to the right to match its counterpart on the left. Do the same thing for the next stitch on the right. Continue alternating between stitching on the left and right until the mouth looks the way you want it to look. I usually have to play around with mine a bit, but again, that's my issue. The long tail ends are for weaving under the mouth on the top to stitch the mouth on the back during the finishing work so the ends can be joined. Moving right along to part 6 of our detailing segment, we are going to be defining the arms. So here we go. For the arms, we are going to be doing another combination of single crochet along the outer edges in addition to surface stitching to shape those arms and cover up the color changes. So we're going to start with a small ball of yarn in color A, and we'll join it between the legs of that first stitch below the head on the left arm. Now we're going to single crochet evenly along the edge of the left arm, checking the tension every so often along the way. And then once we reach the end of the outer edge, we'll begin surface stitching to distinguish between the arm and the leg. Then we'll smooth out the color change between the arm and the body. We're going to surface stitch right up under the surface stitching on the head before finishing off. Pull that cut end through the final stitch and push it back through the same stitch it came from to the back. Work the right arm the same exact way, beginning with the join where the arm meets the head and single crocheting along the outer edge of the arm. I'll meet back up with you and work the border along the legs and belly. Continuing to part 7 of our detailing segment, we are going to work a border around our legs and the belly. So let's get started. Now we're going to work a border around the edges of the legs and belly, starting on the left leg where it meets up with the left arm. Grab a ball of color A and join by drawing up a loop between the legs of that stitch right under the left arm. Then begin single crocheting evenly along the edge, checking the tension every now and then as we go along. Once we get to the last edge stitch on the left leg, We're going to work a surface stitch rather than a single crochet, so there's less bulk at the angle. We're going to work one more surface stitch up the leg. Then we're going to turn the loop upside down by laying it across the edge of the belly. We're going to work one last surface stitch before working our single crochet border again. When we get to the last color A on the belly, we're going to work our surface stitches again over color B. Here's the first one, then one more up the belly. Now we'll turn the loop upside down and lay it down toward the edge of the leg to work the last surface stitch. Then we'll begin single crocheting evenly along the edge of the right leg until we work the stitch just before the last stitch that meets up with the arm. Here we want to work one surface stitch and finish off, threading the tail end through the same stitch we're pulling it through. Again, this alleviates bulk at those angles. In part 8 of our detailing segment, we're going to surface stitch around the paws at the color changes. Using color B, we're now going to surface stitch between the color changes on the paws. Let's start with the left paw by drawing up a loop anywhere between the two colors and just start stitching. With all the surface stitching we've done on this panda so far, you're a pro by now, right? We're just going to continue all the way around until we reach the stitch just before our first surface stitch. Then we'll finish off by cutting a longer tail and pulling it all the way through the last stitch. Then thread the tail and under both legs of the first surface stitch and draw it back down between the legs of the last surface stitch where it came from. They are now connected. Do the same thing on the right paw, and I'll meet back up with you to work our final stitches. We're almost there. Can you believe it? I'll see you soon. We're in for just a little bit more of surface stitching in part 9 of our detailing segment, where we're going to surface stitch between the color changes on the belly, and then we are done, with the exception of your finishing work, of course. Now we're going to surface stitch between the legs and the body to complete our panda. We'll use color A, beginning where the left leg meets the left arm, working down around the leg, across the belly, and back up the right leg, finishing where it meets the right arm. Let's grab our yarn and get started. Drop a loop from the back of the work through this stitch between the color change in the angle. Now, just start surface stitching between those color changes down to where we worked surface stitches when creating the border around the legs and belly. Lay the last stitch worked over the stitch from working the border and draw up a loop through both stitches. Now, draw that loop diagonally to the right to begin surface stitching between the color changes along the belly. Continue until you reach the second surface stitch on the right side of the belly. Place the last stitch worked over this second surface stitch again, drawing up a loop through both of those stitches. Continue surface stitching along the right leg until you get to the angle where the right leg and right arm meet. Bring the last surface stitch under a surface stitch from the arm and finish off, threading the tail through the last stitch and down through the same stitch it came from. Aside from the remaining finishing work, you have just completed this amazing panda. Here's the front. Hopefully you can see all of that. And here's the back. Nice and tidy. I hope I made this as easy as possible and that you enjoyed the process. Remember, if you have questions or need any help, please don't hesitate to comment below or email me at support@justspoolinaround.com. If you'd like to see more free content, please subscribe, like, and ring that notification bell. Thanks again for watching. Peace out, you hand knitting lovies. Until next time.